The winter of 1910 came down hard on the Texas plains, sharp winds slicing through fences, snow burying trails, and silence stretching for miles like something waiting to break. Caleb Boone stood on the porch of his ranch house, unmoving despite the cold. His broad shoulders were dusted with snow, his gloved hands resting on the railing like carved stone. Below him, the yard stretched wide and empty, until a lone wagon creaked through the storm, its wheels groaning under the weight of something far heavier than wood and iron. Inside that wagon sat, daughter of the man Caleb Boone had sworn years ago to destroy. Caleb didn't step forward as the wagon came to a stop. He didn't need to. The deal had already been made. The papers signed. The preacher paid. Had chosen his pride over his blood. And now his daughter belonged to Caleb. The driver climbed down first, avoiding Caleb's eyes as he opened the wagon door. For a moment, nothing moved. Then she stepped out. Was smaller than Caleb expected, but there was nothing fragile about the way she carried herself. Her yellow prairie dress was dulled by travel and snow, clinging lightly around the curve of her pregnancy. One hand rested against her side, steadying herself, while the other gripped the edge of the wagon. Her face was pale from the cold, but her eyes were steady. Not fearful, not broken, just watching. Caleb felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Not pity, not guilt. Something sharper. Discomfort. You understand the terms? Caleb said, his voice low and even. Stepped forward slowly, boots crunching against frozen ground. She stopped a few feet away from him, looking up, not shrinking beneath his height, not lowering her gaze. I understand enough, she replied softly. No tremble, no hesitation. The wind howled between them. Caleb studied her for a moment longer before turning toward the house. Then don't waste time, it's already done. The church stood half buried in snow, its wooden frame groaning as the storm pressed against it. Inside, the air was just as cold. There were no guests, no music, only a tired preacher flipping through worn pages, and two witnesses who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Stood beside Caleb at the altar, her hands folded in front of her. She didn't look at him. Not once. When the preacher asked for her consent, there was a pause, long enough for the wind outside to rattle the windows. Caleb turned slightly, watching her now. Waiting. Testing. Finally spoke. I do. Quiet. Simple. But not surrendering. Something in Caleb's jaw tightened. The ceremony ended as quickly as it began. No ring, no kiss, just words spoken into cold air that didn't care. As they stepped outside, the storm seemed louder somehow, like it had been listening. The ranch house felt no warmer than the church. The old housekeeper stood near the doorway as Caleb led inside. Her lined face softened slightly when she saw the girl, but she said nothing. Caleb didn't slow down. She'll stay in the east room, he said flatly. She works like everyone else, no exceptions. Hesitated, she's with child. She's under my roof, Caleb cut in. That's all that matters. Said nothing. She simply followed down the hall, her steps careful but steady, disappearing behind a narrow wooden door. Days passed. Cold, quiet, controlled. Was given no special treatment. She woke before sunrise, helped in the kitchen, carried water, mended clothes, and did whatever was asked, despite the strain it put on her body. The ranch hands watched at first with curiosity, then confusion. Because she didn't complain. Didn't argue. Didn't break. Instead, she listened. She noticed things. A shortage of flour that no one had spoken about. She stretched what little they had into meals that fed everyone. A sick ranch hand left unattended. She sat beside him through the night, cooling his fever with damp cloths. Broken tools left scattered. She organized them without being told. Quiet changes. Small but undeniable. Even Jade, Caleb's hard-edged foreman, began to nod at her in passing. She's different, he muttered one evening, standing beside Caleb in the yard. Not like the rest. Caleb didn't respond. But he'd noticed. And he didn't like it. That night, Caleb stood outside the main house, the lantern light flickering behind him as voices drifted from the bunkhouse. Ain't natural, one of the men was saying. Girl like that, she should folded by now. She ain't folding, another replied. She's fixing things. A pause. Then quieter. Feels like she's the one running this place. Caleb's jaw tightened. The wind carried the words straight into him, sharp as knives. Without thinking, he turned and walked back inside. Was in the kitchen, her sleeves rolled up slightly, her hands dusted with flour as she worked dough on the table. She didn't look up when he entered. That irritated him more than anything else. "You're forgetting your place," Caleb said. Her hands didn't stop moving. "I know exactly where I stand." Caleb stepped closer, his presence filling the room. "You're here to serve, not to change things." Now she looked at him. Calm, steady, unafraid. And for the first time, there was something else in her eyes. Not defiance. Not anger. Something quieter and far more dangerous. Understanding. "Then maybe," she said softly, "you should start acting like something worth serving." The words settled into the silence between them. Caleb didn't move. Didn't speak. But something inside him shifted, subtle, unwelcome, and impossible to ignore. For the first time since she arrived, Caleb Boone wasn't in control. The storms did not pass. If anything, they grew worse. By midwinter, the Boone Ranch stood surrounded by endless white, fields buried, fences swallowed, and supply trails cut off like veins frozen shut. The wind howled day and night, pressing against walls and windows as if trying to tear the place apart. Inside, tension settled over everything. Food was running low. Livestock had begun to weaken. Men who once laughed over whiskey now spoke in hushed voices, counting what little remained. And at the center of it all, kept moving. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't ask for authority. She simply acted. Where others saw shortage, she saw calculation. Flour that should lasted a week now stretched into 2. Salted meat was carefully rationed, bones boiled into broth, scraps turned into something warm enough to keep men standing. She showed the kitchen hands how to preserve what little they had left, turning desperation into survival. Out in the yard, she worked beside the men when she could, never overstepping but never shrinking away either. "Stack the hay higher, keep it off the snow," she told one of the younger ranch hands, her voice calm but certain. "It'll rot if it stays like that." The boy hesitated, glancing toward Jade. Jade studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Do it," he said. And just like that, they listened. Caleb noticed. Of course he did. From the porch, from the barn, from the shadows where he stood watching more than speaking. Everywhere he looked, there she was. Not commanding, not demanding, but guiding, changing things, fixing things. It unsettled him in a way no enemy ever had. Because he didn't know how to fight it. One evening, Caleb stepped into the bunkhouse unannounced. The men fell quiet instantly. He let his gaze move over them slowly before speaking. "Rations are starting tomorrow," he said. "No one eats more than they're given." A murmur passed through the room, low, uneasy. Then one of the older hands cleared his throat. "Sir, Miss already adjusted the rations this morning." Silence followed. Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. She did what? Jade stepped forward this time, steady but cautious. "Kept us from running out too fast," made sense. For a moment, Caleb said nothing. Then he turned and walked out. But his steps were heavier than before. That night, the storm hit harder than ever. The wind screamed like something alive, slamming against the buildings with enough force to shake the beams. Snow pushed through cracks in doors and windows, creeping across floors in thin, icy lines. Then came the sound. A distant shout. Then another. Caleb was already moving before he fully understood it. "Barn," someone yelled. "The west barn." He grabbed his coat and rushed into the storm, boots sinking deep into snow as he forced his way forward. Shapes moved through the white haze, men running, horses panicking, lanterns flickering wildly. And then, gunfire. Sharp, sudden. Too close. Caleb's instinct snapped into place. "Get down," he shouted, pulling one of the men behind a half-frozen fence post as another shot rang out. Figures emerged through the storm, dark silhouettes on horseback. Armed. Organized. Not raiders. Something worse. The attack came fast. Bullets tore into wood, horses screamed. Flames began to lick up the side of the barn where a lantern had been knocked loose. Caleb fired back, his movements precise, controlled, but even he could see it. They were outnumbered. Planned. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. Then everything shifted. A beam from the barn roof cracked under the weight of snow and fire, collapsing inward with a roar. The ground trembled beneath it. Caleb turned too late. The structure gave way, sending burning debris crashing down. And the last thing he saw was the world folding into fire and smoke. When he opened his eyes, the storm felt distant. Muted. The sharp sting of cold had been replaced by something heavier. Thick air, darkness, the smell of ash. He tried to move. Pain shot through his side. Don't. The voice was quiet. Close. He turned his head slightly. Her face was smudged with soot, strands of hair clinging to her damp skin. Her breathing was uneven, her hands trembling slightly as she pressed a cloth against his wound. "You're alive," she said, more to herself than to him. Caleb stared at her, his mind struggling to catch up. His voice was rough. Why? She didn't answer right away. Outside, the sounds of gunfire had faded, replaced by distant shouts and the crackling of fire. Finally, she looked at him. Not with anger, not with fear, but with something deeper. "I don't let hatred decide who I am." The words settled between them. Heavy, unshakable. By morning, the attackers were gone. The storm had swallowed their tracks, leaving behind only damage and questions. Jade and the others worked to put out what remained of the fire, their movements slower now, more cautious. Inside the house, Caleb sat at the table, silent. Across from him rested, pale, exhausted, but still composed. Then Jade stepped in, removing his hat. "There's something you need to know," he said. Caleb looked up. Jade hesitated, then continued. "Those men weren't here to take supplies, or land." A pause. "They were asking for her." Caleb's gaze shifted slowly toward. She was the target. Silence filled the room. Who sent them, Caleb asked, though something inside him already knew. Jade's jaw tightened. One of them talked before he bled out. Another pause. Then, the name landed like a gunshot. Didn't react. Not outwardly. But her fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the table. Caleb leaned back slowly, his mind turning. Hadn't just given her away. He had tried to erase her. Completely. Caleb's eyes moved back to the woman who should have hated him, who had every reason to let him die in that fire. And yet, she didn't. The question burned in him now, louder than the storm ever had. If she had every reason to hate me, why did she save me? And for the first time in years, Caleb Boone had no answer. The storm passed as suddenly as it had come. By morning, the sky stretched clear and pale over the Boone Ranch, sunlight spilling across the snow like something new trying to be born. The damage was everywhere, charred beams, broken fences, scorched, but for the first time in weeks, the wind was silent. And in that silence, everything felt different. Caleb Boone stood in the middle of the yard, watching the men rebuild what had nearly been lost. His coat hung loosely over his shoulders, his movements slower now, not from injury alone, but from something heavier settling inside him. For years, he had believed strength meant control. Power meant fear. Respect meant silence. But everything standing around him now, every wall still upright, every man still working, every breath still drawn. It wasn't because of him. It was because of her. "Gather everyone," Caleb said quietly to Jade. The foreman hesitated, studying him for a moment before nodding. "All right." Within minutes, the ranch hands gathered in the open yard, their faces worn but attentive. Stood near the porch, her hands folded. Even the youngest workers fell silent. Stepped out last. She moved carefully, her body still recovering, one hand resting lightly against her side. But her presence, calm, steady, seemed to settle something in the air itself. Caleb turned to face them all. For a moment, he said nothing. The old Caleb would have spoken quickly, commanded, declared. But this time, he chose his words. "I built this place with my hands," he began, his voice low but carrying. "Thought that made it mine." A pause. "I thought breaking people made me strong." The wind brushed softly across the yard, but no one moved. Caleb's gaze shifted, too. "I took her from her father to punish him," he continued. "Turned her into something less than a wife." His jaw tightened slightly. "But all I did was show what kind of man I had become." Silence deepened. Then slowly, Caleb reached to his side. His gun belt. The one thing every man there recognized as his power, his authority, his identity. He unbuckled it and let it fall into the snow. A soft sound, but it echoed louder than any gunshot. "This ranch," Caleb said, his voice rougher now, "is still standing because of her." He didn't look away. "Not me." The men exchanged glances, uncertain, surprised, but none spoke. Stepped forward. Slowly. She stopped a few feet from him, her eyes searching his face, Not for weakness, not for pride, but for truth. You can't undo what you did, she said quietly. The words were not cruel. They were honest. Caleb nodded once, I know. A long breath passed between them. But you can choose, she continued, what kind of man you become next. Something shifted in Caleb's chest then, not sharp like before, not heavy, but steady, like something finally finding its place. The days that followed were not filled with grand gestures. No sudden forgiveness. No easy peace. But change, real change, began. Caleb didn't take back control. He gave it. Became the voice the ranch followed, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. She organized the rebuilding, guided the workers, and slowly brought life back into the land that had nearly been lost. And Caleb, he worked, not above the others, not ahead of them, but beside them. He fixed fences with his own hands, carried wood, took orders when needed, and when men spoke now, they didn't lower their voices out of fear. They spoke with respect. Weeks turned into months. Winter faded, and spring came quietly. Grass pushed through the thawing, the sky softened, the ranch breathed again. One morning, under a wide open sky, stood at the edge of the field, her newborn child wrapped gently in her arms. The wind moved softly through her hair as she looked out over everything that had changed. Footsteps approached. Caleb stopped beside her. Not too close. Not distant either. Just there. He looked at the child for a moment, then at the land stretching beyond them. Never thought I'd see it like this again, he said. Didn't look at him right away. Neither did I. A quiet moment passed. Then she turned slightly, her voice soft but certain. It wasn't control that saved this place. Caleb nodded. I know. Another pause. Then slowly, he stepped closer. Not as a man claiming something, but as one choosing where he belonged. Beside her, the sun rose higher, casting golden light across the ranch. And for the first time in a long time, Caleb Boone didn't feel like he owned the world in front of him. He felt like he was finally part of it. He married her to control her world, but she rebuilt his instead.